And we're finally back for more Archie Sonic. This episode might be a bit of a long one. I mean, obviously I can't tell yet. I'm just starting to record it now. But we're going to be covering a lot. Specifically, a couple of stories that I have been purposefully neglecting talking about in my previous videos. The Knuckles stories. As I'm sure you know by now, and if you don't, go back and watch the last few episodes, writer Ken Penders chose Rad Red Knuckles the Echidna to be the conduit through which he told the stories he was most passionate about. And that included a long-running arc through the main series that lasted over a year, from May 1995 until July 1996, and ended up being so popular that it gave birth to Knuckles' own comic series. I did cover one of these stories, one called Fire Drill, in the 4th episode of the series, so I suggest going back and watching that if you haven't. Long story short, it features Knuckles being threatened by a mysterious figure who seems to know more about the island than he does. We'll be going through those stories I skipped in old videos, as well as pushing ahead of Sonic's timeline into issues we haven't discussed yet. I'll show the stories list on screen right now, so you can read them if you like. And before we get started, I thought it a little prudent to mention that a lot of the comics we're going to be talking about today are very backstory focused. A lot of what we learn and what we discuss is going to be thousands of years before the events of the main timeline. So I thought, just to simplify things and not keep jumping back and forth, I was just going to tell the events in chronological order. So if you want those twists to go unspoiled, go ahead and read those comics yourself. And if you either have read them already or don't care, then here we go. Over 1,000 years ago, the Echidna people lived in Echidnapolis, a beautiful city that was the center for the most technologically advanced civilization ever known. It still sat on the land that would become the floating island, but at this point, it was still firmly part of the surface. However, disaster was not far off. Kayla Law was the preeminent astronomer of her era, and had a great observatory alongside her husband, Jordan. Together, the two of them discovered a terrifying future. A white comet was hurtling towards Mobius, with an impact calculated to destroy Echidnapolis. They quickly took this information to the population of the city, causing panic until they brought forward a solution: the Chaos Emeralds. The Echidna people would put all their resources towards mining the powerful gems, while the two scientists concocted a way to harness their power and literally move the giant city out of the way. And so they did, not knowing if they had weeks or months to complete their task. Also, I find it interesting that this comic specifically mentions that Chaos Emeralds are dug out of the planet's crust. It seems like these collections of chaos energy are just a naturally occurring phenomenon in the comic. But, of course, Archie Sonic lore is very different from the game canon, as you can tell by the fact that they collected 12 emeralds to lift the floating city. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it for the main games, in case you were wondering. Kayla Law managed to use the emeralds and a crystalline chamber in order to break the city clean of the surface, saving the Echidnas, but also dimming them to a meandering existence without a true home or connection to the surface world. This saved the Echidna people, but was also the greatest mistake their people would ever make. Many years later, a lot of the Echidnas had begun to realize this, and were trying to find ways to safely set the island back down on the surface. Among the Echidna scientists working to achieve that goal were Kayla Law and Jordan's great-grandsons, Edmund and Dimitri. For the most part, the greatest worry the Echidna had were in relation to the emeralds themselves. If they were to just yoink the emeralds out, the island would sink like a stone, killing anyone on it and destroying the city. Instead, the two scientists created a machine they called the Chaos Siphon, which would slowly suck the energy from the emeralds and allow the island to float gently down to the ground. This plan, however, went awry. Following the footsteps of their great-grandmother, the two brothers went to the Echidna elders with their plan. However, not wanting to entrust the safety of their people to untested theory, the elders dismissed the plan and sent them home. This threw Dimitri into a rage. He knew that their plan would work, and he wanted to prove it to those who doubted him. So he stole the siphon and went to drain the emeralds himself. Edmund followed, flanked by the authorities, including for some reason a judge still wearing his wig and robes, and arrived to see Dimitri already in the middle of pulling the power from the emeralds. Seeing that they'd come to stop him, Dimitri turned the Chaos Siphon's absorption rate up beyond safe levels, causing it to draw in so much power that it exploded, destroying 11 of the 12 emeralds and sending all that power rushing through Dimitri's body. Amazingly, even the one emerald on its own could keep the island aloft, and that emerald would remain on the island in perpetuity until the events of the comic series. Unbeknownst to the Echidna, who were more focused on the island's safety, the energy had not killed Dimitri. Instead, it made him something akin to a god, a living Chaos Emerald. He became possessed by the spirit of Enerjack, an Echidna demigod whose essence had been scattered throughout the Chaos Force. Enerjack took all present into custody and built a giant tower from which he could rule Echidnapolis, reprogramming the city's robotic peacekeeping force to control the population and using their technology in the floating island to conquer the world. However, before his plans could truly be set in motion, the tower's foundation was destroyed by an unlikely adversary, a colony of fire ants. They toppled the building, turning its crumbled remains into a mountain known as Mount Fate, and burying Enerjack deep within it. These events sent a shock through the entirety of Echidna culture. They had come so close to destroying the world as they knew it, and they knew that this could happen again. As such, they made two promises. First, all the advanced technology the Echidna had once relied on were to be sealed away, never again to be used. Second, Edmund made a vow to protect the island and its emerald at all costs. He would become the first guardian of the floating island, a role he would pass down to his son, and would continue down the family line until it reached his descendant, Knuckles the Echidna. Knuckles himself was, of course, the son of the previous guardian, Locke. Locke told Knuckles all the stories of their ancestors and their people, and showed his sons the ins and outs of the island, except for a couple of locations, namely the Forbidden Zone, a region of the island protected by a barrier of pure, fire-like energy. One day when Knuckles was still young, Locke brought his son to the edge of the Forbidden Zone, and bid the young guardian farewell. He told Knuckles that he needed to serve their ancestors, and that the boy would have to make his own way going forward. He stepped into the energy field, and Knuckles presumed his father to have died a fiery death. This event, watching his father's apparent suicide, left a scar on Knuckles' psyche, leading to him becoming the self-denying workaholic we've come to know throughout the series. That said, Locke didn't leave Knuckles without any guidance at all. He'd left Knuckles in the care of Archimedes, a fire ant who had served as Locke's mentor when he was young, as well as Locke's own father. Archimedes would not take on an active role in helping Knuckles for many years, however. Also, I want to bring up the similarities between the names Archimedes and Archie. Not only is Archimedes red, color also associated with the red-haired Archie Andrews, but soon after they meet, Knuckles actually gives Archimedes the nickname Archie, which they make very clear is not pronounced the same way as Archie. It just seems really purposeful to me. Also, it's worth mentioning that echidnas actually eat ants in the real world, so just keep that in mind, I guess. From there, he would eventually meet Sonic and Robotnik, and the events of the comic as we know them would start to unfold. And we come to the modern day. We open up with the Knuckles Chaotic Special Issue, which takes place immediately after the events of Sonic the Hedgehog issue 30, the ending to the last video. It adapts the events of a game that I still haven't covered on the channel as of yet, but I'll be sure to link it in the art cards when I finally get to that point, I'm assuming sometime in the new year. The story opens with the floating island being threatened by a new force, capitalism. A mysterious showman known as Renfield T. Rodent has created something that chills Knuckles to his very core, an amusement park. The Islanders are generally very hostile towards outsiders. After all, the island is a fantastic strategic position for any military force. So with a war on the planet's surface, the island's inhabitants had to remain on guard. This rodent seemed to be drawing as many people as possible in, including the freedom fighters and Knuckles' loathsome rival, Sonic the Hedgehog. This seems to follow a storyline based on the English version of the Chaotix manual. The English and Japanese versions of the game have very different stories, but keep an eye out for the main episode on that game if you want to hear more. After a suggestion from Renfield, the freedom fighters and Knuckles enter the Hall of Mirrors, where they're imprisoned within the glass by Robotnik, who's revealed to have funded Renfield's park and secretly been the mastermind of this whole event. Knuckles manages to escape, but his abilities are stolen from him. No knuckle spikes, no gliding, nothing. Outside the walls of the park, Knuckles meets two new allies. A responsible and hardworking honeybee named Charmy, and a wisecracking chameleon named Espio. That doesn't sound right, does it? the characters of the Chaotix will be rewritten heavily after their reappearance in Sonic Heroes. But as of now, these characters had very little behind them. As such, the writers ended up creating their own personalities and backstories for each of these characters. They would eventually become the characters we know from the games, even if the method of doing so was somewhat controversial. They also find a crocodile named Vector dancing to his own rhythm when a wall next to them blows apart, revealing a mighty armadillo named Mighty the Armadillo. He's joined by a couple of escaped Eggman robots named Heavy and Bomb, whose AI had been so complex that they managed to develop their own personalities and moral codes, similar to how Metal Sonic would be treated later in the series. To prove their loyalty to these new allies, they armed the newly formed team with power gems similar to the ones that power the two robots. They work together to, all at once, shut down the theme park rides, causing Robotnik to summon the newly rebuilt Mechasonic to defend himself. They swiftly defeat the robot, who's forced to use the power gem now integrated into his system to keep the battle going, growing into a large kaiju-sized robot, Metal Sonic Kai. Knuckles, now realizing that the gems have that kind of power, also increases his own size to take on the threat. The fight sends out huge amounts of power, enough to shatter the mirrors that the Freedom Fighters were trapped in, freeing them and granting Knuckles his stolen powers. With his strength renewed, the Echidna is able to easily defeat Metal Sonic, causing Robotnik to flee and leave Renfield for dead. With him now in custody, taken in by... Wait, is that a Muppet? That's a Muppet. What the hell is he doing here? Okay, strange-looking policemen aside, despite the assembled group being wary of the idea of forming a team, Sonic christens the group Chaotix, and has a feeling they'll stick together. Okay, so now the next few stories were released in a weird order, but this is the best time I can come up with what I've seen. First, let's go back in time to the story First Contact from the Sonic Triple Trouble miniseries. This is a follow-up to Firewatch from the Sonic and Knuckles special. With all the backstory from earlier in mind, we can now positively identify the mysterious figure Knuckles is chasing through the story as Archimedes, beginning his mentorship of the young Echidna. The story opens with Knuckles saving Vector from a near-death experience over a volcano. Smelling smoke, he goes to find something burned into a nearby rock, the name Archimedes, and an arrow. Knuckles follows the mysterious sign and is attacked by an Eggman robot. I think this is meant to be a recolor of the Fire Breath mini-boss from Angel Island Zone. When this robot is defeated, it's followed up by the Hey-Ho from Mushroom Hill. This leads to Knuckles assuming, incorrectly, that Eggman is actually Archimedes. More likely, Archimedes simply mended the robots after they were defeated during the game and sent them after Knuckles. Knuckles continues on, and finds that his chase has led him back to the Chaos Chamber. In here, Archimedes taunts Knuckles, telling the Echidna that all these incursions are simply tests for the Guardian, and that he still has a long way to go before he can prove himself. Knuckles realizes that this isn't a problem he can solve with just his fist. He needs to use his head to outmaneuver this new foe. This is a realization he will have a number of times throughout this story arc, and one that I'm not really sure sticks with them after it's over. Back now in the Knuckles Chaotix book, we find that the crew did decide to stick together, and they're all playing tag together somewhere on the island. During the game, Espio jumps into the bushes and comes across a figure he wouldn't expect, Archimedes. Espio finding the ant surprises both of them, with Archimedes claiming that he never would have been found if he hadn't been otherwise occupied, likely with Knuckles. He then disappears and the game continues. Suddenly the forest becomes a war zone, with explosions all over the place. The Chaotix assume it to be Eggman, but Knuckles knows better at this point. It has to be Archimedes. They try to fight the unseen force, but one by one, the Chaotix are taken out. Vector falls down a hole, Charmy gets blasted by explosives, Mighty is taken out by a robot as strong as he is, and Espio is silently kidnapped by a ninja-like figure. Knuckles finds himself alone. Archimedes taunts the Echidna, saying that if the Chaotix had stuck together, they would all be fine. But with Knuckles so focused on fighting Archimedes, his friends had suffered the consequences. Again, Knuckles had failed the test laid before him. Archimedes now leaves the Echidna with a mysterious warning, that he needs to choose between his friends and a new threat to the island that he'd sworn to protect. Now for the sake of video length, we're going to be talking about Knuckles stories from issues of the main series we haven't discussed yet, but we're just going to discuss the Knuckles stories. We'll save the Sonic stories for next time, so just letting you know. Now this is a fairly short story. In it, Knuckles wanders around the ancient ruins of the floating island, searching for Archimedes and the Chaotix. And also, he is royally pissed. In his anger, Knuckles ends up walking right past the location where the Chaotix are being held, and continues his search towards the mountain, all while Archimedes watches through a series of security cameras hidden throughout the island. The Chaotix finally awaken in the cell set up for them by Archimedes, who promises, via loudspeaker, that all will be made clear to them once Knuckles has arrived, if he ever ended up arriving. When the Chaotix complain about the power imbalance between them and their mysterious captor, Archimedes relents and introduces himself to the group in person. I'm not sure why SBO looks surprised at his appearance though, considering that he's actually seen Archimedes before. Once again, we see a series of security monitors being watched by a mysterious figure. But this time the figure is clearly not Archimedes, as his monitors are focused on Archimedes' compound, spying on the figure we believe to be the big picture baddie of this arc. The new foe, we'll call him Locke for no apparent reason, ponders actually helping Knuckles, but ends up dismissing the idea, as he thinks it best that Knuckles is able to grow from this situation. It seems like everyone lately has been focusing more on Knuckles' growth than actually antagonizing him. And even though Knuckles is walking away from his friends, he is approaching another chance to find the truth, high atop the peaks of Mount Fate. On his hike towards the mountain, Knuckles' mind can't help but wander back through his life. Everything Archimedes had said sounded familiar to him. It's only now that he realizes why. It sounds a lot like his father. Now the voice itself sounds different, so it couldn't be him, but the way he talked, the lessons he imparted, sounded very similar to Archimedes. This actually makes a lot of sense, given that Archimedes trained Locke as well as Knuckles. Knuckles felt like his life was a series of screw-ups, between being tricked by Robotnik, relying on Sonic, and he even regretted initially turning down the Chaotix as a team. But now he knows that some of the answers he seeks lie with Archimedes, and he continues forward. During this story, Knuckles reflected on a lot of the history and lore we discussed at the start of this video. I won't repeat it here for brevity's sake, but it's through this story that Knuckles realizes where Archimedes had to be hiding his friends. Inside the Grand Conservatory, the ancient repository where the Echidna of Old stored their banned technology. And it's here where we hit the crescendo of the story, where Knuckles learned the truth of his people's history and the location of his friends. Inside the Grand Conservatory, avoiding the many traps and trials left by his ancestors, Knuckles went searching for his friends. At the same time, the pile of rubble that was Mount Fate began to rumble, before crumbling, revealing a figure sitting within it. Enerjack, still alive after thousands of years. As soon as he escapes, the demigod heads towards the nearest site of life, the ruins of the Grand Conservatory. In the ruins' deepest chambers, Knuckles finally finds the Chaotix, alive and well and in the middle of eating lunch. Here, he finally meets Archimedes as well. And it is here, finally, where Enerjack finds Knuckles and announces his presence to the world. The assembled heroes try to fight him, but the living Chaos Emerald is able to freeze all of them in place. Seeing promise in the Chaotix, he decides to hypnotize them as his soldiers. However, he feels resentment towards Knuckles and Archimedes for their ancestors' actions, and banishes them into the middle of the Sandopolis desert. As they race across the desert to stop him, Enerjack begins the construction of his new city, Necronopolis. Arriving at the city days later, the Echidna and the Ant fought their way into the Citadel, where they also had to face down the hypnotized Chaotix. Knuckles and Archie easily take the three down, but Enerjack literally pulls the air out of their lungs, knocking the pair out. When they awaken, the two escape again thanks to Archimedes' smoke and mirrors trickery and sneak attack Enerjack, finally giving us a real confrontation between Dimitri and the descendant of Edmund, bringing their philosophical war to an end. Knuckles brings up Dimitri's arrogance and selfishness, while Dimitri points to the Council's fear and stagnation. But in the end, the entire battle was nothing but an act. A time waster, allowing Archimedes' fire ants to eat away at the Citadel's foundations, collapsing the structure and repeating history. You know, it rhymes. Like a poem. Or Star Wars. Once the main characters leave the tower, it's inexplicably yeeted into space. The Chaotix are freed from their mind control and associated gambling addiction, and the day is saved. Okay, I lied. The yeeting is entirely explicable. It's revealed to have been the work of Locke, seeking to protect the island from a mysterious underground bunker. He seems proud of Knuckles for not only learning the lessons of the past to defeat his foe, but also in being willing to make connections and trust others, forming a bond with Archimedes in the process. Interestingly, I feel like this scene implies that Locke is supposed to be the real guardian of the island, with Knuckles still being in training, with many secrets being kept from him still. This line in particular seems to imply it, with Locke stating that he's continuing the work of his ancestors. And with this mysterious revelation, we leave Knuckles and the world of Mobius. We've seen a lot more of the history of the Echidna and of Knuckles' world in this video. The revelations and lore established here will become very important in his solo comic series that will be coming up pretty soon. Next time we return our focus to Sonic the Hedgehog. But don't worry, Knuckles will be back, and this time the two of them will fight like you've never seen before. Until then.
Unlike the rest, I'm independent since my first breath, first test, feel the right, then the worst left.